our next speaker is a PhD candidate in the Department of Communication and Culture, Faculty of Arts at the University of Calgary. Her research involves studying the rhetorical strategies employed by the intelligent design slash, I haven't even had a beer yet, creationism movement. She's the secular humanist liaison at the campus Faith and Spirituality Center and co-host of the Legion of Reason podcast. She's also involved in many other secular activities. I'm pleased to introduce to you Christine Shellska. Christine?
So I want to thank everybody for attending my talk on rhetoric and skepticism. And Bill, I'd really like to thank you for having me here. And is everybody having a good time? Good. And Kamloops, I've come to think of Kamloops as the town of allergies and frizzy hair. So if I dab my nose, I'm having some spring effects here. So I'm going to begin by looking briefly at what an argument is and how to place claims into argumentative form. Then I'm going to define rhetoric and skepticism. And I'll talk about a few of my favorite logical fallacies. Then we'll apply a brief rhetorical analysis to an advertisement. And after I conclude my talk, I have a bit of a surprise that I think you guys will enjoy. Bill introduced me, so I won't kind of repeat that, but there's my credentials. Is Twyla here, my co-host on the Legion of Reason? Twyla, yeah, Legion of Reason co-host. Our fearless leader, Randy. Where are you? There you are, Randy. I don't know if some of you might be listening to our podcast and know that Randy and I have a bet. And if you don't know about it, check our archives for February. The bet concludes in February of next year. And that's quite an amusing thing. We will be possibly consuming some alcohol on that day on the air. So, so my cousin was really quick to point out that my talk conveniently takes place just after the bar opens. So if anybody wants to, like I said, shameless name dropping and self-promotion, if anybody wants me to speak anywhere, scheduling me after the bar opens is probably a good idea for everybody. So in my other life before I went back to school, and still occasionally now, I've been involved in advertising, public relations, and corporate communications as a graphic designer and consultant. My dad is also in advertising, so I pretty much apprenticed under him, and I've been doing it professionally since I was 16 years old. I think we probably all come to skepticism in different ways, and for me it was through advertising. I remember quite clearly the moment I became a skeptic. I was probably about 5 years old, and I saw this ad for this toy that looked just incredibly cool. And of course, this ad was running before Christmas, which is a typical advertising tactic, so that children will pester their parents to get them these toys. And that's what I wanted from Santa. My parents tried to dissuade me from asking Santa for that toy because they could see the writing on the wall. But I really, really wanted that toy, so I was pretty relentless. So I got that toy, and it was crap. I think it even broke like a couple of days later. I don't even remember what the toy was, but whatever the claim was, it certainly didn't do it. And yeah, so that was the moment I realized that advertisers can make dodgy claims to sell stuff, sometimes really crappy stuff. And that was the moment my bullshit detector got switched to on. Many of you came to skepticism through science, and that was not the case for me. So let me just say that I'm not really qualified to assess scientific claims, but I certainly know bullshit when I see it, which is what led me to study the intelligent design movement from a rhetorical perspective. Now, as an academic, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and I wanted to take a quick moment to mention two who are here. One is Eugenie Scott, the former executive director for the National Center for Science Education. She'll be delivering the keynote at 4 o'clock, which is why I decided not to speak on the topic of intelligent design, because she'll be talking about that later, and I think we can all really look forward to that. That should be a great talk. So instead, I decided to steal Christopher DiCarlo's ideas. Now, he wrote a book called How to Become a Really Good Pain in the Ass, and although it's not specifically about rhetoric, it had all the right elements, and I enjoyed it so much that I actually assigned it as my class textbook when I taught the course. I know the book is available in the vendor area, and I think you should buy it. It's really good. So did you see what I just did there? I just presented an argument. So Merriam-Webster defines an argument as a reason given in proof or rebuttal, discourse intended to persuade, but the one we're going to go with here is a coherent set of statements leading from a premise to a conclusion. The basic idea here is to take claims and place them into argumentative form. So here's my argument. Premise 1, Dr. DiCarlo is an authority on philosophy of science and ethics. Premise 2, I really enjoyed how to become a really good pain in the ass. Premise 3, you can purchase it in the vendor's area. Conclusion, you should buy it. And I just want to be clear, Dr. DiCarlo had no idea I was going to be promoting his book, and I hope he doesn't mind that I'm using that as an example, and he and I can work out the profit structure later. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm a slide ahead here. Now, I know this crowd is probably already familiar with basic rhetorical concepts, so I hope I'm not preaching to the choir, but I'll quickly run through some of the fundamentals. Since this talk is on rhetoric and skepticism, I'll start by defining the terms. Rhetoric is the art of persuasion, and skepticism is basically an attitude of doubt toward knowledge claims, and the acknowledgement that knowledge is provisional. Skepticism can be traced to the philosopher Pyrrho, who lived during the 3rd and 2nd centuries before the Common Era. And today this attitude or mode of inquiry underpins the scientific method. And although one can be an atheist without necessarily being a skeptic, I'm guessing that probably most of you, especially those of you who've left religions, have applied skepticism to religious claims. So you're probably all quite familiar with this mode of thinking. The foundational text for rhetoric was written by the highly influential philosopher Aristotle, whose work impacted a broad range of fields and still remains relevant today. From Aristotle, we learn about the 3 technical means of persuasion, things that can be controlled by the speaker. First is ethos, the character of the speaker. So when assessing a rhetoric's character, we think about things like what they've accomplished, what sorts of things they've done to contribute towards society, and so on. This is because rhetoric is tied to democracy and the idea that anybody can participate in civic life. The second means of persuasion is pathos, and that's controlling the emotional responses of the audience. And of course, logos pertains to logic, how the argument is constructed. Arguments are either deductive or inductive. The conclusion of a deductive argument necessarily follows from the premises, and the classic example is all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. So if one of the premises is false, the argument is said to be invalid or fallacious. An inductive argument is based on probability and generalization. The classic example here is the claim that all swans are white. Excuse me. My apologies. Sorry. However, there's an unresolved debate in the philosophy of science that David Hume introduced that implicates knowledge. No matter how many times we observe a phenomenon like white swans, there's no guarantee that this phenomenon will occur in the future. We might observe a black swan. So this is why we hold knowledge to be provisional. And a good skeptic will change his or her mind when presented with good evidence that refutes a belief they hold. Aristotle also identified a number of logical fallacies, and I'm not going to go into detail on those because most of you are probably familiar with them, especially if you spend any time online, because goodness knows there are a lot of atheists out there who are very skilled at pointing out these logical fallacies. But I have a few favorites, and if we return to my earlier argument, you can see that I made an appeal to authority twice. Once was to appeal to Dr. DiCarlo's expertise as a philosopher, but that one is not a logical fallacy. I mentioned before that as an academic, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and every time I cite somebody else's work to back up my own arguments, I'm appealing to authority. It's a matter of being careful about what authorities you choose to invoke and ensuring they hold the relevant expertise. If one was to write a paper on quantum physics, and they cited Deepak Chopra instead of Lawrence Krauss, things probably wouldn't go very well for them inside the academic world. Having said that, outside that world, it's pretty clear that things have gone really well for our friend, Mr. Chopra, and he's making money hand over fist with his pseudoscientific nonsense because evidently these claims are persuasive to a lot of people. So my second appeal to authority was to myself, and that one is a logical fallacy. I'll grant that I'm quite capable of reading a book and formulating an opinion on it, and that my ethos as a student of communications probably does grant me some degree of authority. But while I dabble in philosophy, I am not an authority, and I haven't given you a good reason to purchase that book except that I like it. It's a great book, and I hope I persuaded you to consider buying it, but really, I presented rather a bad argument that we as good skeptics can easily tear apart. The next few fallacies are ones Aristotle couldn't have anticipated. Specific to the debating context, Eugenie Scott coined the term gish gallop to describe a particularly effective rhetorical tactic, so named in honor of the late Duane Gish, former vice president of the Institute for Creation Research. Rational Wiki defines the gish gallop as drowning the opponent in such a torrent of half-truths, lies, and straw man arguments that the opponent cannot possibly answer every falsehood in real time. This strategy has been widely deployed by many popular creationists and ID proponents, as well as politicians and media hosts. Another one of my favorite fallacies are manufactroversies, which Lee Cicerelli, and I hope I'm saying her last name right, defines as a manufactured controversy that is motivated by profit or extreme ideology to intentionally create public confusion about an issue that is not in dispute. Cicerelli identifies 3 ways manufactroversies are deployed. That's a hard word to say, and I keep stumbling over it, so forgive me if I mispronounce it. First, manufactroversy creators appeal to values common to both the scientific community and North Americans: free speech, fairness, and objectivity. This serves to frame the non-issue as one of 2 sides that deserves fair and balanced treatment. Second, manufactroversy creators exploit the public's ignorance of scientific concepts, and few scientists have the time, skills, and resources to engage in advancing the public understanding of science. So thank you for the people who come to these conferences and do that work. Second, manufactroversy creators exploit the public's Finally, manufactroversy creators exploit the broader public's ignorance of what scientific consensus is and frame minor disagreements on particular problematics within established research programs as indicative that the entire program is in crisis. In his book entitled The Republican War on Science, Chris Mooney identified how several manufactroversies have been successfully deployed against scientifically settled issues, including the links between tobacco use and adverse health effects, global warming, and evolution. And here's an interesting example of a piece of rhetoric that illustrates how manufactroversies can be deployed. Finally, in 1994, Mike Godwin published an article in Wired magazine describing a fallacious argument invoking evolution as the cause of Nazism. Godwin's law states that as an online discussion grows longer, the probability of a comparison involving Nazis or Hitler approaches 1. This is a form of an ad hominem attack. And for those who might be unfamiliar, ad hominem means against the man, and it's basically a personal attack on the arguer that has nothing to do with the claims he or she is presenting. When people resort to ad hominem attacks, it means they have run out of valid arguments or lost the ability to argue rationally, and they've resorted to name-calling instead. Now, I'm describing Godwin's law as a logical fallacy, but he identified it as a meme specific to the online context. But as many of you know, this one gets deployed frequently outside the online realm. For example, here's a still from a movie called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, featuring Ben Stein applying Godwin's law to a statue of Darwin. And if you haven't seen this shit show of a movie, you should check it out if you need a good laugh. Having said that, it might produce the unintended effect of really pissing you off, in which case I recommend following up with an antidote movie called Religulous, featuring Bill Maher to counter that effect. So I mentioned the word meme, and for those who might not know, this is a word coined by Richard Dawkins and introduced in his book, The Selfish Gene. And the analogy here is that memes, like genes, want to replicate. A meme is basically a unit of culture, and Dawkins describes it as tunes, ideas, catchphrases, clothes, fashions, ways of making pots or of building arches. Just as genes propagate themselves in the gene pool by leaping from body to body via sperms or eggs, so memes propagate themselves in the meme pool by leaping from brain to brain via a process which, in the broad sense, can be called imitation. And here are two of my favorites that I think you can probably all relate to. And of course, there's millions of really great memes out there, but these two just seem appropriate. So I'm going to wrap up by summarizing the takeaway points from this talk, and then we'll do a little exercise in critical thinking by looking at an advertisement. Now, there are different ways to study rhetoric, as well as different sites of analysis like news, political discourse, and even in peer-reviewed journals. What's basically going on there is that academics are trying to persuade other academics to take up their claims and enact them as provisional facts to advance science. So although the modes of discourse vary, what these sites of analysis have in common is that they can all be understood as rhetorical acts of persuasion. From my perspective, I found Dr. DiCarlo's description of argumentation to be a useful analytic tool, and I chose advertising as a site of analysis because, frankly, most people simply aren't qualified to make good judgments about scientific claims. And as I mentioned, I'm one of them. But I think most people have a basic understanding of how advertising works, and that the unstated conclusion driving advertising is you should buy our product or service. So to summarize, I showed you how to place a set of claims into argumentative form, briefly. I defined rhetoric and skepticism, and I presented a few of my favorite logical fallacies. So let's proceed with a quick rhetorical analysis. So while I was searching for an appropriate advertisement for us to have a look at, I chanced upon this steaming pile of space gems, and I suppose that's more interesting and innovative than those cosmetic products where they claim to have dead sea salt in them. So let's have a look at their claims. Premise 1, our product is a secret, but we're sharing it with you. This is pretty standard fare for advertising, persuading the consumer to believe they are privy to some sort of information few others know about. And if it's effective, it will invoke a sense of superiority in the consumer, something akin to being the Joneses to which your neighbors need to keep up with if they're to be regarded as the cool kids on the block. Next is premise 2. Our product is a global, anti-aging, cosmeceutical elixir originating from outer space. What the hell? This claim is such a steaming pile of nonsense, and I'm not even going to touch it. I'll just let you guys draw your own conclusions on that. Premise 3, the product refills wrinkles and restores skin's density. Interesting, I didn't know my wrinkles had become unfilled. Premise 4, the product is a unique scientific and sensory formula with an unprecedented arsenal of preventive, anti-aging, active earthly minerals extracted from precious gemstones and meteorite stardust. Wow! I'll bet when Carl Sagan said that we were all made of star stuff, he didn't anticipate that somebody would run with that claim and apply it to your cosmetic product. The poor man is probably turning over in his grave and writhing in pain from face palming. And although invoking sciencey sounding words is part of, especially for cosmetic products, is a typical rhetorical tactic employed by advertisers. And of course, the conclusion, buy our product. Are you persuaded to try it? No, I'll pass. And that was just a really brief and superficial rhetorical assessment, and I only focused on the explicit claims. But rhetoric isn't just about textual or spoken claims. A more robust analysis might take into account the intended audience, which I suspect is women, and the broader cultural context, and the fact that we value the aesthetic of youth and not age in our culture. And of course, there are the photoshopped images, which are almost a study of rhetoric in and of their own right. And I might add, I recently wrote a rhetorical analysis on the Bill Nye-Ken Ham debate that I'm hoping to have published. And in that paper, I didn't even touch on their body language and what that was saying about each of their rhetorical performances. And that was extremely interesting to watch how they reacted to one another. So that wraps it up for me. And thank you so much for attending my talk. I'd be happy to take a few questions. But before that, I'd like to thank Bill again for including me among these speakers. It's really a privilege to be here and to share the stage with such an amazing lineup. And I really thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I wanted to take a bit of time to give someone else an opportunity to debut her work to our community. and to end this session on a fun note. So I invite you to join in a bit of a sing-along. And please welcome the brilliant and talented Ms. Sophie Ling. Sophie, would you please come to the stage and introduce yourself? Can't see. Oh, there you are. Okay. It's very bright. You should probably go here.
Can we, is there a second mic? You can use that one right there. A second one, though? That's a second. Oh, okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Sophie. I know I've met many of you before in years past at Imagine No Religion, and thank you very much to Bill and all the organizers for setting up such a wonderful event, and thank you to Christine for inviting me up here to share something with you. For those of you who do know me, you're probably aware that I'm a really big fan of math, and it's what I study right now. I also did my bachelor's degree in math, and the other thing I really like is music, so I started writing songs about math, and I will share one with you today. I think we'll have the, we're going to get the lyrics to the chorus, so please feel free to sing along if you'd like. And it's called Take the Hypotenuse. I think this is too low. Can you hear it okay? Is it... When your horse is thirsty and you don't know where to go, the path ahead seems rich with gold, but it is mighty slow. Perhaps there is another way across this rugged land. Perhaps I'll make it there before my horse ceases to stand. Hypotenuse, hypotenuse, always there to make my journey bright. Hypotenuse, hypotenuse, opposite an angle that is right. If you ask the functions, I'm sure they will agree. Hypotenuse is full of use, both on land and at sea. Although it may not seem so, because the earth is round, and geometry is different when Euclid's not around. Hypotenuse, hypotenuse, always there to make my journey bright. Hypotenuse, hypotenuse, opposite an angle that is right. The ancient people wondered, how far is the sun? At the time, most people said the task could not be done. But with cosine and sine, they found this distance 1 AU. Their calculations had produced our hypotenuse, 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 always there to make my journey bright. Hypotenuse, hypotenuse, opposite an angle that is right. It could be 10 or 20 or 60 degrees. Hypotenuse is here to please. It can be seen in radians too, but always less than pi over 2. Or with tau, if that's your thing. Come on, let's hear all the heathen sing. Hypotenuse, hypotenuse, always there to make my journey bright. Hypotenuse, hypotenuse, opposite an angle that is right. Hypotenuse is mentioned in a theorem or two. Pythagoreans were the first to sing it loud and true. Add the squares of other sides and root this mighty sum. You'll find you have hypotenuse, and the praises can be sung. Hypotenuse, hypotenuse, always there to make my journey bright. Hypotenuse, hypotenuse, opposite an angle that is right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. She wrote that. That's original. So, if anybody has questions for either of us, please feel welcome to queue up. And I can't see, so I'm going to have to step away from the light to see if anybody goes to a mic. So, no? Am I done? Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
What's that?